The amber seemed homely to Bech, melted butter refrozen, but Kate was proud of it. The wristwatches, he suspected, would soon stop. They were perilously thin. The toys, segmented kremlins, carved bears chopping wood, were good, but the only children he knew were his sisters in Cincinnati, and the youngest was 9. The Ukrainian needlework that Yekaterina hopefully pushed at him, his imagination could not impose on any woman he knew, not even his mother. Since his success, she had her hair done once a week and wore her hems just above the knee. Back in his hotel room in the 10 minutes before an all Shostakovich concert, while Kate sniffled and sloshed in the bathroom, how could such a skinny woman be displacing all that water? Bech counted his rubles. He had spent only 137. That left 1,283, plus the odd kopecks. His heart sank. It was hopeless. Yekaterina emerged from the bathroom with a strange, bruised stare. Little burnt traces of ashen tears, lingered about her eyes, which were by nature a washed-out blue. She had been trying to put on eye makeup and had kept washing it off, trying to be a rich man's wife. She looked blank and wounded. Bech took her arm. They hurried downstairs like criminals on the run. The next day was his last full day in Russia. All month he had wanted to visit Tolstoy's estate, and the trip had been postponed until now. Since Yasnaya Polyana was 4 hours from Moscow, he and Kate left early in the morning and returned in the dark. After miles of sleepy silence, she asked, "Henry, what did you like?" "I liked the way he wrote War and Peace in the cellar, Anna Karenina on the first floor, and Resurrection upstairs. Do you think he's writing a 4th novel in heaven?" This reply, taken from a little commentary article he was writing in his head and would never write on paper, somehow renewed her silence. When she at last spoke, her voice was shy. "As a Jew, you believe?" His laugh had an ambushed quality he tried to translate, with a shy guffaw at the end, into self-deprecation. "Jews don't go in much for paradise," he said. "That's something you Christians cooked up." "We are not Christians?" "Kate, you are saints. You are a land of monks, and your government is a constant penance." From the same unwritten article, tentatively titled God's Ghost in Moscow. He went on, with Hollywood, Martin Buber, and his uncles all vaguely smiling in his mind. "I think the Jewish feeling is that wherever they happen to be, it's rather paradisiacal, because they're there. You have found it so here?" "Very much. This must be the only country in the world you can be homesick for while you're still in it. Russia is one big case of homesickness." Perhaps Kate found this ground dangerous, for she returned to earlier terrain. "It is strange," she said, "of the books I translate, how much there is to do with supernature. Immaterial creatures like angels, ideal societies composed of spirits, speeds that exceed that of light, reversals of time, all impossible and perhaps not. In a way it is terrible to look up at the sky on one of our clear nights of burning cold, at the sky of stars, and think of creatures alive in it, like termites in the ceiling." Falling so short of the grandeur Kate might have had a right to expect from him, his simile went unanswered. The car swayed, dark gingerbread villages swooped by, the back of the driver's head was motionless. Bech idly hummed a bit of Midnight in Moscow, whose literal title, he had discovered, was Twilight Evenings in the Moscow Suburbs. He said, "I also liked the way Upton Sinclair was in his bookcase, and how his house felt like a farmhouse instead of a mansion, and his grave. So super a grave. Very graceful for a man who fought death so hard. It had been an unmarked oval of earth, rimmed green with frozen turf, at the end of a road in a birch wood where night was sifting in. It had been here that Tolstoy's brother had told him to search for the little green stick that would end war and human suffering. Because her importunate silence had begun to nag unbearably, Bech told Kate, "That's what I should do with my rubles. Buy Tolstoy a tombstone with a neon arrow." "Oh, those rubles," she exclaimed. "You persecute me with those rubles. We have shopped more in 1 week than I shop in 1 year. Material things do not interest me, Henry. In the war, we all learned the value of material things. There is no value but what you hold within yourself." "Okay, I'll swallow them." Always the joke. "I have one more desperate idea. In New York, you have women for friends?" Her voice had gone shy, as when broaching Jewishness. She was asking him if he were a homosexual. How little, after a month, these two knew each other. "Yes, I have only women for friends." "Then perhaps we could buy them some furs. Not a coat, the style would be wrong, but fur we have. Not leather suitcases, no. You are right to mock us, but furs, the world's best, and dear enough for even a man so rich as you. I have often argued with Babochka. He says authors should be poor for the suffering. It is how capitalist countries do it, and now I see he is right." Astounded by this tirade, delivered with a switching head so that her mole now and then darted into translucence, for they had reached Moscow's outskirts and street lamps, Bech could only say, "Kate, you've never read my books. They're all about women." "Yes," she said, "but coldly observed, as if extraterrestrial life." To be brief, I saw you in the back row glancing at your wristwatch, and don't think that glance will sweeten your term grade. Fur it was. The next morning, in a scrambled hour before the ride to the airport, Bech and Yekaterina went to a shop on Gorky Street, where a diffident Mongolian beauty laid pelt after pelt into his hands. The less unsuccessful of his uncles had been for a time a furrier, and after this gap of decades, Bech again greeted the frosty luxuriance of Silver Fox, the more tender and playful and amorous amplitude of Red Fox, Mink with its ugly mahogany assurance, Svelte Otter, Imperial Ermine tail-tipped and black like a writing plume. Each pelt, its soft tingling mass condensing acres of Siberia, cost several hundred rubles. Bech bought for his mother 2 mink still wearing their dried snarls, and 2 silver fox for his present mistress, Norma Latchet, to trim a coat collar in. Her firm, white Saxon chin drowned in fur is how he pictured it, and some ermine as a joke for his house-slave sister in Cincinnati, and a sumptuous red fox for a woman he had yet to meet. The Mongolian salesgirl, magnificently unimpressed, added it up to over 1,200 rubles and wrapped the furs in brown paper like fish. He paid her with a salad of pastel notes and was clean. Bech had not been so exhilarated, so aerated by prosperity since he sold his first short story in 1943 about boot camp to Liberty for $150. It had been humorous, a New York Jew floundering among Southerners, and is omitted from most bibliographies. He and Yekaterina rushed back to the Sovietskaya and completed his packing. He tried to forget the gift books stacked in the foyer, but she insisted he take them. They crammed them into his new suitcase with the furs, the amber, the wristwatches, the infuriatingly knobby and bulky wooden toys. When they were done, the suitcase bulged, leaked fur, and weighed more than his 2 others combined. Bech looked his last at the chandelier and the empty brandy bottle, the lovesick window and the bugged walls, and staggered out the door. Kate followed with a book and a sock she had found beneath the bed. Everyone was at the airport to see him off, Babochka with his silver teeth, Mushkin with his glass eye, the rangy American with his air of lugubrious caution. Bech shook Skip Reynolds' hand goodbye and abrasively kissed the two Russian men on the cheek. He went to kiss Yekaterina on the cheek, but she turned her face so that her mouth met his, and he realized, horrified, that he should have slept with her. He had been expected to. From the complacent tiptoe smiles of Babochka and Mishkin, they assumed he had. She had been provided to him for that purpose. He was a guest of the state. "Oh, Kate, forgive me, of course," he said, but so stumblingly she seemed not to have understood him. Her kiss had been colorless but moist and good, like a boiled potato. Then somehow, suddenly, he was late. There was panic. His suitcases were not yet in the airplane. A brute in blue seized the two manageable ones and left him to carry the paper one himself. As he staggered across the runway, it burst. One catch simply tore loose at the staples, and the other sympathetically let go. The books and toys spilled, the fur began to blow down the concrete, pelts looping and shimmering as if again alive. Kate broke past the gate guard and helped him catch them. Together they scooped all the loot back in the suitcase, but for a dozen fluttering books. They were heavy and slick in the Cyrillic alphabet, like high school yearbooks upside down. One of the watches had cracked its face. Kate was sobbing and shivering in excitement. A bitter wind was blowing streaks of grit and snow out of the coming long winter. "Genly, the books," she said, needing to shout. "You must have them. They are souvenirs." "Mail them," Bech thundered, and ran with the terrible suitcase under his arm, fearful of being burdened with more responsibilities. Also, though in some ways a man of our time, he has a morbid fear of missing airplanes and of being dropped from the tail-end lavatory. Though this was 5 years ago, the books have not yet arrived in the mail. Perhaps Yekaterina Alexandrovna kept them as souvenirs. Perhaps they were caught in the cultural freeze-up that followed Bech's visit and were buried in a blizzard. Perhaps they arrived in the lobby of his apartment building and were pilfered by an émigré vandal. Or perhaps, you may close your notebooks, the mailman is not clairvoyant after all. Bech in Romania, or the Romanian Chauffeur. Deplaning in Bucharest, wearing an Astrakhan hat purchased in Moscow, Bech was not recognized by the United States Embassy personnel sent to greet him, and rather than identify himself, sat sullenly on a bench, glowering like a Soviet machinery importer, while these young men ran back and forth conversing with each other in dismayed English, and shouting at the customs officials in what Bech took to be pidgin Romanian. At last, one of these young men, the smallest and cleverest, Princeton, 51 or so, noticing the rounded toes of Bech's American shoes, ventured suspiciously, "I beg your pardon, пожалуйста, but are you—" "Could be," Bech said. After 5 weeks of consorting with communists, he felt himself increasingly tempted to evade, confuse, and mock his fellow Americans. Further, after attuning himself to the platitudinous jog of translatorese, he found rapid English idiom exhausting. So it was with some relief that he passed in the next hours from the conspiratorial company of his compatriots into the care of a monarchical Romanian hotel and a smiling party underling called Atanas Petrescu. Petrescu, whose oval face was adorned by constant sunglasses and several round sticking plasters placed upon a fresh blue shave, had translated into Romanian Taipei, Pierre, Life on the Mississippi, Sister Carrie, Winesburg, Ohio, Across the River and Into the Trees, and On the Road. He knew Bech's work well and said, "Although it was travel light that made your name illustrious, yet in my heart I detect a very soft spot for Brother Pig, which your critics did not so much applaud." Bech recognized in Petrescu, behind the blue jaw and sinister glasses, a man humbly in love with books, a fool for literature. As that afternoon they strolled through a dreamlike Bucharest park containing bronze busts of Goethe and Pushkin and Victor Hugo, beside a lake wherein the greenish sunset was coated with silver, the translator talked excitedly of a dozen things, sharing thoughts he had not been able to share while descending alone at his desk into the luminous abysses and profound crudities of American literature. With Hemingway, the difficulty of translating, and I speak to an extent of Anderson also, is to prevent the simplicity from seeming simple-minded. For we do not have here such a tradition of belles-lettrist fancifulness against which the style of Hemingway was a rebel. Do you follow the difficulty? Yes. How did you get around it? Petrescu did not seem to understand. Get around how? Circumvent? How did you translate the simple language without seeming simple-minded? Oh, by being extremely subtle. Oh. I should tell you, some people in my country think Hemingway was simple-minded. It is actively debated. Petrescu absorbed this with a nod and said, I know for a fact his Italian is not always correct. When Bech got back to his hotel, situated on a square rimmed with buildings made, it seemed, of dusty pink candy, a message had been left for him to call Phillips at the U.S. Embassy. Phillips was Princeton 51. He asked, What have they got mapped out for you? Bech's schedule had hardly been discussed. Petrescu mentioned a production of Desire Under the Elms I might see, and he wants to take me to Brasov. Where is Brasov? In Transylvania, way the hell off. It's where Dracula hung out. Listen, can we talk frankly? We can try. I know damn well this line is bugged, but here goes. This country is hot. Anti-socialism is busting out all over. My inkling is that they want to get you out of Bucharest, away from all the liberal writers who are dying to meet you. Are you sure they're not dying to meet Arthur Miller? Kidding aside, Bech, there's a lot of ferment in this country, and we want to plug you in. Now, when are you meeting Taru? Knock, knock, Taru. Taru who? Jesus, he's the head of the Writers' Union. Hasn't Petrescu even set up an appointment? Boy, they're putting you right around the old mulberry bush. I gave Petrescu a list of writers for you to latch on to. Suppose I call him and wave the big stick and ring you back. Got it? Got it, Tiger. Bech hung up sadly. One of the reasons he had accepted the State Department's invitation was that he thought it would be an escape from agents. Within 10 minutes, his phone rasped, in that dead, rattly way it had behind the Iron Curtain, and it was Phillips, breathless, victorious. Congratulate me, he said. I've been making like a thug and got their thugs to give you an appointment with Taru tonight. This very night? Phillips sounded hurt. You're only here 4 nights, you know. Petrescu will pick you up. His excuse was he thought you might want some rest. He's extremely subtle. What was that? Never mind, Pajolsta. Petrescu came for Bech in a black car driven by a hunched silhouette. The Writers' Union was housed on the other side of town in a kind of castle, a turreted mansion with a flaring stone staircase and an oak-vaulted library whose shelves were 20 feet high and solid with leather spines. The stairs and chambers seemed deserted. Petrescu tapped on a tall, paneled door of blackish oak, strap-hinged in the somber Spanish style. The door soundlessly opened, revealing a narrow, high room hung with tapestries, pale brown and blue, whose subject involved masses of attenuated soldiery unfathomably engaged. Behind a huge, polished desk, quite bare of furnishings, sat an immaculate miniature man with a pink face and hair as white as a dandelion pall. His rosy hands, perfectly finished down to each fingernail, were folded on the shiny desk, reflected like water flowers, and his face wore a smiling expression that was also, in each neat crease, beyond improvement. This was Taru. He spoke with magical suddenness, like a music box. Petrescu translated his words to Bech as, "You are a literary man. Do you know the works of our Mikhail Sadovenu, of our noble Mikhail Beniuts, or perhaps that most wonderful spokesman for the people, Tudor Arghezi?" Bech said, "No, I'm afraid the only Romanian writer I know at all is Ionesco." The exquisite white-haired man nodded eagerly and emitted a length of tinkling sounds that was translated to Bech as simply, "And who is he?" Petrescu, who certainly knew all about Ionesco, stared at Bech with blank expectance. Even in this innermost sanctum, he had kept his sunglasses on. Bech said, irritated, "A playwright, lives in Paris, theater of the absurd, wrote Rhinoceros," and he crooked a forefinger beside his heavy Jewish nose to represent a horn. Taru emitted a dainty sneeze of laughter. Petrescu translated, listened, and told Bech he is very sorry he has not heard of this man. Western books are a luxury here, so we are not able to follow each new nihilist movement. Comrade Taru asks what you plan to do while in the People's Republic of Romania. "I am told," Bech said, "that there are some writers interested in exchanging ideas with an American colleague. I believe my embassy has suggested a list to you." The musical voice went on and on. Petrescu listened with a cocked ear and relayed, "Comrade Taru sincerely wishes that this may be the case, and regrets that because of the lateness of the hour and the haste of this meeting, urged by your embassy, no secretaries are present to locate this list. He furthermore regrets that at this time of the year, so many of our fine writers are bathing at the Black Sea. However, he points out that there is an excellent production of Desire Under the Elms in Bucharest, and that our Carpathian city of Brasov is indeed worthy of a visit. Comrade Taru himself retains many pleasant youthful memories concerning Brasov." Taru rose to his feet, an intensely dramatic event within the reduced scale he had established around himself. He spoke, thumped his small, square chest resoundingly, spoke again, and smiled. Petrescu said, "He wishes you to know that in his youth he published many books of poetry, both epic and lyric in manner." He adds, "A fire ignited here," and here Petrescu struck his own chest in flaccid mimicry, "can never be quenched." Bech stood and responded, "In my country we also ignite fires here." He touched his head. His remark was not translated, and after an efflorescent display of courtesy from the brilliant-haired little man, Bech and Petrescu made their way through the empty mansion down to the waiting car, which drove them rather jerkily back to the hotel. "And how did you like Mr. Taru?" Petrescu asked on the way. "He's a doll," Bech said. "You mean a puppet?" Bech turned curiously, but saw nothing in Petrescu's face that betrayed more than a puzzlement over meaning. Bech said, "I'm sure you have a better eye for the strings than I do." Since neither had eaten, they dined together at the hotel. They discussed Faulkner and Hawthorne, while waiters brought them soup and veal a continent removed from the cabbagey cuisine of Russia. A lithe young woman on awkwardly high heels stalked among the tables, singing popular songs from Italy and France. The trailing microphone wire now and then became entangled in her feet, and Bech admired the sly savagery with which she would, while not altering an iota her enameled smile, kick herself free. Bech had been a long time without a woman. He looked forward to 3 more nights sitting at this table, surrounded by traveling salesmen from East Germany and Hungary, feasting on the sight of this lithe chanteuse. Though her motions were angular and her smile was inflexible, her high, round bosom looked soft as a souffle. But tomorrow, Petrescu explained, smiling sweetly beneath his sad-eyed sunglasses, they would go to Brasov. Bech knew little about Romania. From his official briefing, he knew it was a Latin island in a Slavic sea, that during World War II its anti-Semitism had been the most ferocious in Europe, that now it was seeking economic independence of the Soviet bloc. The ferocity especially interested him, since of the many human conditions it was his business to imagine, murderousness was among the more difficult. He was a Jew. Though he could be irritable and even vengeful, obstinate savagery was excluded from his budget of emotions. Petrescu met him in the hotel lobby at 9, and taking his suitcase from his hand, led him to the hired car. By daylight, the chauffeur was a short man the color of ashes, white ash for the face, gray cigarette ash for his close-trimmed smudge of a mustache, and the darker residue of a tougher substance for his eyes and hair. His manner was nervous and remote and fussy. Bech's impression was of a stupidity so severe that the mind is tensed to sustain the simplest tasks. As they drove from the city, the driver constantly tapped his horn to warn pedestrians and cyclists of his approach. They passed the pre-war stucco suburbs, suggestive of Southern California, the post-war Moscow-style apartment buildings, rectilinear and airless, the heretical all-glass exposition hall the Romanians had built to celebrate 20 years of industrial progress under socialism. It was shaped like a huge sailor's cap, and before it stood a tall Brancusi column cast in aluminum. "Brancusi," Bech said. "I didn't know you acknowledged him." "Oh, much," Petrescu said. "His village is a shrine. I can show you many early works in our National Museum." "And Ionesco? Is he really a non-person?" Petrescu smiled. "The eminent head of our writers' union," he said, "makes little jokes. He is known here, but not much produced as yet. Students, in their rooms, perhaps, read aloud a play like The Singer Devoid of Hair." Bech was distracted from the conversation by the driver's incessant mutter of tooting. They were in the country now, driving along a straight, slightly rising road lined with trees whose trunks were painted white. On the shoulder of the road walked bundle-shaped old women carrying knotted bundles, little boys tapping donkeys forward, men in French blue work clothes sauntering empty-handed. At all of them the driver sounded his horn. His stubby, gray-nailed hand fluttered on the contact rim, producing an agitated stammer beginning perhaps 100 yards in advance, and continuing until the person, who usually moved only to turn and scowl, had been passed. Since the road was well-traveled, the noise was practically uninterrupted, and after the first half-hour nagged Bech like a toothache. He asked Petrescu, "Must he do that?" "Oh, yes. He is a conscientious man." "What good does it do?" Petrescu, who had been developing an exciting thought on Mark Twain's infatuation with the apparatus of capitalism, which had undermined his bucolic genius, indulgently explained, "The bureau from which we hire cars provides the driver. They have been precisely trained for this profession." Bech realized that Petrescu himself did not drive. He reposed in the oblivious trust of an airplane passenger, legs crossed, sunglasses in place, issuing smoother and smoother phrases, while Bech leaned forward anxiously, braking on the empty floor, twitching a wheel that was not there, trying to wrench the car's control away from this atrociously unrhythmic and brutal driver. When they went through a village, the driver would speed up and intensify the mutter of his honking. Clusters of peasants and geese exploded in disbelief, and Bech felt as if gears, the gears that space and engage the mind, were clashing. As they ascended into the mountains, the driver demonstrated his technique with curves. He approached each like an enemy, accelerating, and at the last moment stepped on the brake as if crushing a snake underfoot. In the jerking and swaying, Petrescu grew pale. His blue jaw acquired a moist sheen and issued phrases less smoothly. Bech said to him, "This driver should be locked up. He is sick and dangerous." "No, no, he is a good man. These roads, they are difficult. At least, please ask him to stop twiddling the horn. It's torture." Petrescu's eyebrows arched, but he leaned forward and spoke in Romanian. The driver answered. The language clattered in his mouth, though his voice was soft. Petrescu told Bech, "He says it is a safety precaution." "Oh, for Christ's sake!" Petrescu was truly puzzled.